I grew up under the mentorship of people like John Johns and Roy Burris, and thinking back in those days, there was a time when soy hulls were considered to be just junk, and boy, when we showed that what a good feed those were, and people made a lot of money on soy hulls there in the early days, there's a lot of things that we need to be thinking about to improve our systems long term. And as we really study our production systems here, it's about the forages. And I'm really glad that you guys do a forages session here at KCA every year, because we really need to think about that fundamental base for our system. And while what Scott talked about there in the first talk, those are those sort of big picture things we all need to think about, we need to understand, and then help with as an industry. But this kind of thing is what you do every day on your farm, and those decisions have a big impact on the production of your cows and the success of your farm. So really glad to be here to do this, and mention the Amazing Grazing Program. I'm not going to talk about a lot of amazing grazing type stuff, but I will make one more comment about that before I get into the topic. But this is actually Johnny's cow, so it's been great to work with Johnny Rogers. He was my first graduate student, and it's amazing that we're still working together after all these years. But to tell you, I want to tell you a little bit more about me to start with, because I have been around for a really long time, Jeff. All those things I've done is because I've been doing it for so many years. But I am from Virginia originally. I was born in this little town, Virgilina, or at least at the nearest hospital. And so this has been in my blood since the day that I was born, literally. And actually, my parents say that when I was a small child, I was terrified of cows. And when I was about 4 years old, they decided we got to do something about this. So they started taking me and intentionally making me get around cows until I got over that. And so they created somebody that decided not to go to medical school, but to go ahead and be a farmer, much to their chagrin. Well, after a few years in the early 80s of farming, I decided I need to find a way to have a public job. I was going to have a public job if I wanted to continue to be a farmer, and that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing, Jeff. So I'm a farmer first. Our farm, our system is based on Kentucky 31 tall fescue. I'll make a few comments about that, but we certainly wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for Kentucky 31. So I'm a big fan, and have spent my whole life really trying to improve our production system there at the farm. Now, tomorrow, I said I'll mention this one more time, but there's going to be a session on sort of soil health, how to build that, how to maybe take a little different approach to forage management, and that's what we've been doing on our farm, starting 40 years ago, but really intensively for about 25 years. And so this is my mature cow herd, and we move them pretty much daily. It's a part of the cow check, and it takes a lot less time if we move them than if we didn't move them. We want to check cows daily, and so we know where they are, and they line up, and we can have a good that's just the way we do it. And this has built a system that needs very little fertilizer. It's just a great cow-calf production system that we've developed. Now, the thing that is a little bit different about what we do is that we finish a lot of these cattle. And we've been doing this now for about 12 years, I think, Jeff, since we really started commercially finishing more than just one or two for ourselves. And we work through a company that works with about 10 different farmers and supply cattle to local markets. And so that's where we've come. And I'll come back and kind of make a comment about this scene later. But Kentucky 31 is a problem when you're trying to go to this level. These cattle, they grow well to yearling, and then when we start trying to get them done, we just cannot get them done. Even with a fair bit of feed, we've found that to really be successful with this, we've got to have something other than our Kentucky 31. And in this case, it's ryegrass. And ryegrass works really great for this. In fact, this whole scene used to be a big tall fescue field, our best one, right up near the barn. And we've killed all of that now and have been running annuals on it. But the annuals are killing me. I've got to do something other than annuals, because annuals, you're always behind, Jeff. It just seems like If you want to utilize the first crop, the second crop takes a hit. So we're converting most of this to novel endophyte tall fescue, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. So that's kind of me. And so when I put this slide up and you see these old scenes that are Kentucky in this particular picture, this country was in terrible shape back after the Depression, and it was just, it was bad, Jeff. I mean, we know that in many ways. And this was just because of excessive tillage and crops like tobacco that just love that kind of soil, And so we got to the point where a lot of the farms really would not sustain farm families, and we were kind of in a subsistence system in those days. So a lot of effort was put into to revegetation of a lot of that, trying to promote putting it in pasture, putting it back in trees, and that was through soil conservation. And a lot of that was done with Kentucky 31 tall fescue. I'll tell you a little bit more about the fescue story. We don't really have time. This is one of those things that I'm not going to show a lot of data, Scott, today, because there's a whole lot known about this. But this is where we came from. So this Kentucky 31 really saved this region. There's just no one that really understands the history will debate that with you. It's a great grass, and really, because it was such a great grass, it was very rapidly spread across the whole region, including all of Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, what we know today as the tall fescue region. It's only been here for about 100 years. So as I say, it's dramatically changed things, helped with those erosion problems, certainly provide us a highly persistent cool season grass that we did not have at that time. Extends the grazing season, just gives us a lot better year-round production. And really, if you study it and think about it, and if you've grown it, it is an amazing plant. It is truly the wonder grass. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. Most of you know this story. How many of you really know the fescue story well? Okay, some. So more of you should. How many of you have tall fescue as your base forage on your farm? Okay. So good. We will spend a few minutes on this, but certainly this was discovered by someone in Extension back in 1931 in Kentucky on William Suter's farm, and at that time he didn't know what it was. He just knew it was the best grass he'd ever seen, and it was on the farm when he bought the farm. He had selected seed and kind of started getting his neighbors planting it, and they were having similar observations. And when the guy, Dr. Fergus from University of Kentucky, saw that grass, he was equally amazed, and he got some of Suter's seed and took it back to the university and found out that it was the darndest thing they had ever seen. And as oftentimes happens with the academic world, he kind of hung around and talked about it a lot, but never did a whole lot about it. So there was another guy there that was an extension guy that was really visionary, and he pushed him to get that out. And so in 43, this Kentucky 31 was released. And it spread like wildfire, partly because it was so good, but partly because soil conservation cost shared putting it out there on the land. And very quickly, it started to help things a lot. Now, unfortunately, there was some baggage with that. And as it got more established, then people started seeing problems with their cattle. And it took a while to understand that it was the endophyte. It's that circle with the little squiggly lines in there. If you stain the leaves and look at it under the microscope, you're going to see that there's these fungal mycelia that live inside of that plant between the cells. And so obviously, wow, that thing's infected with a fungus. Let's get that out of there, and maybe that will make a difference, because they did figure out that was the problem. Well, you take the fungus out, it's not the wonder grass near so much like it was anymore, right? So they turned out it is that fungus that gives it that hardiness. And so, unfortunately, again, a long story, Jeff, but our people that came ahead of us strongly recommended this. And the early adopters got excited, planted it. Their cattle were doing so much better, but then the calls started coming in, gosh, this grass died. We had a drought and it's like dying. Others started seeing the problem redevelop, and tests showed that, well, it had come back, that the toxic stuff had come back. So that wasn't quite as simple. Finally, about the mid-90s, a breakthrough was made where they realized that these endophytes are all over the place, and they started to be able to find them. There was a trip made by scientists to Northern Africa and Southern Europe to collect a wide variety of these endophytes. And they found out that some of them don't produce those darn toxins. And so the technology then was advanced, and you all know the story. Max Q tall fescue was released. And it was the first novel infected tall fescue, and it's dramatically better than endophyte free. Now, it had some issues and that sort of thing, and as you might imagine, the breeders and the companies improved it. And so now we have the second generation novels out there. There's quite a few of them on the market. I'll mention that later. But that kind of brings us up to today. Now, if we go out in the countryside, and I guess y'all will agree with this if you've got tall fescue, we're still on Kentucky 31, and it still works for us good enough to survive. I mean, it has sustained all of our farms. So getting rid of it is a real psychological challenge for us, and so we just have to be aware that, again, I'm a big fan. I love it. Right now, I've got some stockpiled, and I'm really glad because it's going to help us get through the rest of the winter. Now, if you don't know the story well, and I think we determined there's a whole book on this. So I'm not going to talk any more about the development or the story, but I just will promote this book a little bit. Don Ball, Gary Lacefield, and Carl Hovland put together a very, very nice, easy read. And I would say everybody in here ought to have this, and you ought to have your kids read it, because it's about probably one of the most important things in Kentucky agriculture that ever occurred. So get that book. I know that I've got that one with me, and I've read it many times. So the first person that comes up to me after this, I'll give you that copy right there and be glad to. So let's stop and think a minute about what would be the ideal base forage for a system for a state like Kentucky that's tall fescue country. Well, we need it to be perennial, high yielding, long growing season, moderate to high nutritive value. In other words, enough protein and not too much fiber and those kinds of things we can measure. Easy to establish, easy to manage and maintain stands. Resilient to drought and pugging, which is getting muddied up in the wintertime, and then support at least a moderate level of animal performance. I mean, that's like the ideal one, right? Well, Kentucky 31 is every one of those things except the bottom one. It just doesn't quite get there. Now, why this is becoming more of a problem, I know for us at home, is because these cattle are race cars now. I mean, these need a lot higher octane diet than they did back in 1943, right? This is becoming more of a challenge for us because of the genetics of the animals that we have. So again, back to Kentucky 31. Fescue is a great forage, lots of good things about it, and it's tolerant of mismanagement. Now, this is one of our concerns as people that work with extension, not probably with the crowd in this room, but with the other 90% of the people that have it. This gives it an ability to withstand mismanagement. Overgrazing is rampant across the region because it's the one grass you can overgraze, and most years it's going to survive. And cows are going to be somewhat productive. So this is part of the challenge of getting something done about this, is that it works to just have a very low stocking rate, turn the cows out, let them take care of themselves, and the grass does not necessarily die. On the other hand, This is probably the most well-documented and researched problem that we have in our industry. We know that it's costing the industry a couple of $2 billion a year. And put that in perspective with heart failure, I mean, it's probably more costly than the heart failure thing. In fact, it's about where BRD is with respiratory disease in general. So that's a massive loss. The problem is that respiratory disease loss is a dead animal here that I already paid for, okay? Fescue losses are the animal that was never born. And you don't think about it the same way. You don't see it as much. So we need to keep that in our mind. I've done a lot of research in this over the years, and this is from one of our studies. Any study done on this comparing toxic fescue to either novel or endophyte free, and this study had all three. Same day in June, and while that top slide, all your cows will not look like that. Chances are you've got some that do. I do, and we've been calling hard for a long time to try to get rid of that. The problem is our genetics are coming in from areas that are not challenged with toxic tall fescue. So they, these animals carry intolerance, continue to carry that into our herds through the genetics. So we while you can select for cows that can tolerate it, we keep putting back in genetics that can't tolerate it. So we need to be able to work on that. Now I'm going to, again, a laundry list of things that this does, and I don't want to try to explain all of these things, but those first two is the mechanism we understand of how this works physiologically. One, it causes vasoconstriction, which you got a good introduction to that through Scott's talk. The capillary beds tighten up as a result of the toxins that are coming from the grass. That causes increased blood pressure, but it also causes them to be very heat intolerant. They can't circulate the blood to the periphery, and so they basically burn up. They also have a reduced prolactin level, and that's a hormone that comes out of the brain, very important one, that's involved in hair coat shedding, for one thing. A little bit on growth probably, but a big effect on hair coat. And so we see things like the retained winter hair coat, elevated body temperature. Everything after that are kind of like the symptoms of the thing. And we do see times when we have dystocia in fall calving cows in certain situations we know is related to fescue and other things like that. So a lot of things, but the main thing is just poor performance. Just the animals just don't grow and gain as well as they should. Just an example of research data here from a Virginia study, red being the body temperature of animals on toxic fescue, the green being novel, and dramatic differences in body temperature, especially in the afternoon in the summer. You know, when they start crawling in the pond, you know, there's a reason, they're hot. And this causes problems, especially in the summer. As far as average daily gains on calves, this is studies have been done all over the region, and usually you're looking at about a half to a pound a day difference in gain between animals that are on toxic fescue versus either novel or endophyte free. And you can see it's almost every study done. It's one of the easiest things to show. And we were about a pound a day in the work that we did in North Carolina with heifers. As far as cow productivity, this is something that there was a lot of work done back in the 80s and 90s on this, but we're looking at a dramatic reduction in calving rate in spring calving herds on toxic fescue compared to if they're not toxic. Now, when you see this data, you got to understand these were organized research trials. It was pure fescue, a lot of things done to make it about as bad as it can be, and it's bad. Now, most of you are looking at that saying, well, I've got 88% calf crop or something like that. Most of us have done things to try to overcome this, but nevertheless, the system is trying to drive down your breeding rate. Cattle in the pond. How many of you have cattle that just want to get in a pond? We all do, right? They're hot. And the point I want to make with this slide is not that they're in that pond or whatever, but that this is, I've always thought this was normal. Growing up in a fescue-based system, I didn't realize that all cows didn't want to do that until I had this ryegrass, is that where we killed this stuff, and these cattle are just out when it's 95 degrees grazing, and they're just like, what's the problem? The other cows are just suffering and about crawl. They can't crawl in the pond anymore. We fenced them all out, but they certainly suffer. So we've got to just be aware that we've been sort of desensitized to the problem because we've seen it our whole lives, and we've got a successful farm, and it doesn't seem to be the worst thing that we have to deal with. Now, there are a lot of promising approaches out there, and that's another story about fescue, okay? Every time we open up a magazine, another solution to the problem. Okay, well, the more we study, each solution we study, it doesn't work, right? It's human nature. We're always trying to do something. But we can make some progress in genetic selection of the animals, as I mentioned. Fall calving is almost a no-brainer for the region. I'll show you why. I showed you the breeding for spring calving cows. I'll show you what happens with fall calvers. We have a lot of feed-through remedies, and this is the one that I just cringe every time there's a new product out there that's going to solve all the problems, because none of them really have. And we can feed. The one thing we know is that about 3 to 5 pounds of feed on these calves will respond to it, and you can get to where you need to be with performance. Now, from a plant-based perspective, we can do what we call toxin level management, which is understand when the toxins are high and do what you can to prevent that. We can do that by suppression of seed heads, aggressively grazing off the spring seed heads before they become toxic. We can use legumes, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that because that's something that we kind of take for granted, but most of us don't have enough legumes and can add that back. And there's some special things going on with red clover that we're in early stages of understanding that, but I'm not going to talk about that at length today because it's still to be proven out. There's the novel endophyte varieties that certainly are an opportunity. And then for the more advanced producers, we need something other than tall fescue. We need some warm season grasses, some annuals maybe, to really make that system that's going to, especially for me, where I need this high quality forage pretty much all the time, it can help me to really get that into the system. So I want to tell you that animal genetics do matter, and we need an EPD directly developed for fescue tolerance, but we do not have it. We know that there's individuals within breed that really vary greatly with their tolerance. Some, in my experience, I buy test station bulls. About every other one falls apart, and they're not there in about 3 years because they just couldn't handle the fescue. The other ones, they do fine, but I don't have any way of predicting that. There are several breeds working on the EPD, but it's kind of slow. But for now, there are some indirect EPDs, hair coat shedding in Angus and Pap that we heard about. Because of the relationship with blood pressure, that's kind of on that vasoconstriction part, and then the hair coat shedding is through the prolactin mechanism probably. Both of those are things we can use. But now the reality check on EPDs. When you look at an Angus, you look at Select Sires catalog or wherever you shop for AI sires, there's about 20-some EPDs now that you can look at. And I got foot problems. I want growth. I need the right amount of milk. I need calving ease. And then I get down to, okay, I need hair coat shedding and I need Pap to not be too bad. And the heritability or the accuracy on those is very low. So it's still hard to collect that data, and the accuracies are not there. So I wouldn't buy a bull just because he had a good hair coat shedding EPD. He's got to have all the other stuff too, and that's really becoming a challenge. Now, I will say there's one thing that I'm going to talk about. I have not talked a lot about this, Jeff, and I didn't really plan on it, but as I thought about this, the one thing that we know works really good is this thing called the slick hair gene. And it's a mutation that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. So the slick hair gene, or the slick hair trait, I like to call it, is it's a mutation. It's a dominant gene, so they breed true to that. And it is present in most of the Central and South American Criollo breeds. So these sort of naturally developed in their region, and that particular bull has got that. He's got a little bit of Sinopol in him, and comes out of a good line of Angus cattle and cattle that we have. This is a Flush brothers that were out of a heterozygous sire that carried one copy of that gene. And when that's the case, in a dominant gene, the half of his calves will have it, half of them won't. So the bottom, you've got one that doesn't have it, the top has it. And they're dramatically different. Same way with heifers. Now, what we found was that these really influence body temperature, pregnancy rate, prolactin. It improves ovarian function, and that was published about 3 or 4 years ago now. And it's really the most dramatic thing we've talked about. And we've talked about doing a study on this. In fact, we had a grant that wasn't funded, but we do need to continue to realize this has got some potential. This is how dramatic it is. The top is normal hair on toxic fescue, body temperature. The other 3 lines, you can hardly tell there's 3. That's the endophyte-free fescue, and the slick hair on toxic fescue. So it is really pretty amazing how it affects them. I mentioned fall calving. Fall calving is a no-brainer, and I would say based on some work that was done in Arkansas, they had big differences just by switching to fall calving, and so that's something that if you're not doing that and you have fescue problems, certainly need to consider doing that. Now, supplementation helps. We know that, Jeff. That's the one thing I guess as nutritionists, we like to feed them a little bit. It's amazing how it works, right? These are calves that are grazing stockpile Kentucky 31 eating whole cottonseed. And I've found, and we published some work years ago, a couple of pounds of whole cottonseed will give you about 3 or 4/10 of a pound of increased gain, and makes these winter stockers work for me. Of course, these are destined for finishing, and I'm trying to keep them gaining all along so that we can get our carcass data good. So a lot of feed-through remedies. I'll just mention a few of them. Yeast, trace minerals, Tasco used to be all we talked about, and it's gone as far as I can tell. Didn't work. Antioxidants, capsaicin, hot chili peppers is the latest thing that is being promoted. All of them work a little bit. You know, we can show they work a little bit, but really it's not very impressive. You still got a problem. Again, concentrate feeding, 3 pounds. And when I talk about these additives, I say it's got to work better than 4 pounds of gluten and soy hulls, because we know what that'll do. And most of those don't work better than that, and they're just about as expensive. Now, there are a lot of opportunities for the forage side. We can clip our seed heads. We know you need to reduce your fertilizer, suppress the seed heads, use a more diverse forage base, focus on stockpiling in late winter because the toxins decline. So there's a lot of things you can do there. But really what I think and what we're doing at home is renovating some of our pasture to get completely rid of it on part of the acreage so we can use it for our cattle that need that stuff. So if you understand the life cycle of the endophyte, it comes through the seed and it does go up into the grass, and it's highest in the seed heads. And so that's why getting out there and clipping seed heads after they come out, before they make hard seed, will get some of that toxin out of the system, and the regrowth in the summer is not very toxic. So just understanding that can help you. Now, the last thing here is the novel endophyte tall fescue. We work with that a lot, and I want to make sure you understand it. The first panel there is with the red squiggle, that's the toxic stuff, okay? And as I said, we went through endophyte free, and it just didn't work very well. And then we've been able to put back those non-toxic novel endophytes into these new products, and they really are, they have proven out very, very strongly in research. So these are the ones that are out there on the market. Depending on who you like to get your seed from, they all work well. Some minor differences between them, and we have some publications out there online that can help you decide which of those might work if you want to give this a try. So what this can do for you, it can really give you that improved gain. If you do a complete conversion, it does a lot for you. But basically, it does have strong benefits all across the system, and the more we can have out there, the better it's going to be. One thing that's important to me is I'm trying to increase production on the land. We've kind of fallen behind because we don't put out fertilizer. And the reason we don't put out fertilizer is because it makes the fescue more toxic. So if you have novel, you can pour the fertilizer to it and grow a real good stockpile and stuff like we used to do without it having toxins in it. So the main thing I want you to take this point home. Let's just say this is 2 pounds a day on the blue line there. You can call it where you want it. We do things to overcome this problem. And that's what all of us have done that still have mostly toxic. We add legumes, we supplement a little bit, maybe we rotate the cattle more to control seed heads, but we find ways to get there. It's expensive. So the Alliance for Grassland Renewal, I'm going to skip through that one just because I'm running out of time, and I'm going to just tell you there's a lot of reasons why folks don't do this. We do a lot of workshops and ask people, why haven't you planted more? And, unclear cost benefit is the main one, but there's a lot of other things. And so we need to be aware that you get a big benefit from the first bit that you renovate. That's the biggest bang for the buck, is that first field that you do, because you can use it strategically for the cattle that need that. There was a study done in Arkansas that is a very good study where they killed 25% of it and put novel in there, and they had dramatic improvements in performance just from that little bit when they used it strategically. Now, economics is important, and certainly we can decrease the years that it takes to pay off your investment dramatically if you only do it on part of the acres and get that benefit. So that's good news, actually. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on economics, but we know that this is important. And if you do everything, everything is good, the pastures are good, and you kill it and plant novel, it's going to take almost 5 years to recover that investment. Now, it's going to last a lot longer than that, so that's okay. But if we think about cost shares available for this, you have cost share, $250 an acre is about what you can get for that in most states. Then it only takes about a year for it to pay back. So if you can figure out how to do it, it's going to pay back. If it needs renovation, certainly, and could increase production through renovation, it's almost a no-brainer. It's just like it pays itself off right away. So we need to be keeping that in our mind. The last point is that the main thing that scares people off from novel is the seed cost. It's expensive, about twice what Kentucky 31 is. So we, in the model that I use, I can vary things. And one thing I varied was the seed price, $2 to $5. If we could get the seed for $2, would it make a difference? And it basically doesn't. It's very insensitive to seed cost. And that's because all of the other costs of renovating a pasture you have to spend whether you plant Kentucky 31 or novel. So let's just say, what if you just said, well, I need to renovate the pasture, I'm just going to plant that old Kentucky 31. I know it, I understand it, I know how to use it, whatever. Well, you'll get some benefit. And the reason is because that Kentucky 31 is probably not going to be 100% infected. For various reasons, you're probably going to end up with a 25 or 30% infection rate in those new plantings. So you'll get some benefits. So I just assume maybe you get about half the benefits you would get with novel. You get the lower seed cost. I put that in the model. I put in, that probably if you're going to renovate a pasture, you're probably going to need lime and some fertilizer, and you'll get some increased cow production days. Well, when you do it like that, it takes 8 years almost for the Kentucky 31 to pay off, and it only takes 4 years for the novel. So it just never makes sense. So I'm just going to boldly say, don't ever plant Kentucky 31. If you are a serious cattleman, that's the one thing we can do. Whether you want to kill some of what you got is another thing. But just if you're going to plant something, don't plant Kentucky 31. So we do have a newsletter at the Alliance. I'll invite you to sign up for that. I'm working with one of my neighbors, and he's developing his whole farm around novel. And so it's going to be interesting to see somebody that's all they ever knew was having novel fescue on their farm, and it'll be real interesting to have that experience. Okay, Gordon, that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Poore. We'll take a couple questions right now if it's okay.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. Who's got a question?
We got the mics back there. Anybody have a burning question? Got one right here.
Either one. We can take two.
Okay. You talked about fall calving as being one answer. I've noticed in the fall calving herds, they're harder to get the calves to shed off, the fall calvers, than the spring calvers. They slick off quick. And what is that about? I mean, why do we see that?
Well, that's because those calves are getting big enough to eat fescue. They're starting to get the toxins, and that prevents their shedding. Those spring calves, they don't have to really shed. They don't develop that strong hair coat like fall calves will. And of course, we all know the little brown fuzz balls, and that's just a part. That's because of their starting to get those toxins. It's starting to affect them as well. Plus, they're getting reduced milk production from the cow. Both of those. Okay, we've got one over here.
You had a slide on there about maybe when you're redoing a pasture with novel endophyte fescue, but are you not seeing an issue with planting novel endophyte in Kentucky 31 with the 31 just smothering it right back out? Or?
Okay, yes. Thank you for asking that question. And I'll just tell you that at the line, we have some well-developed procedures for getting things planted for that so that doesn't happen. And typically what you need to do is you need to kill the Kentucky 31 that's there. Typically with glyphosate, you could use tillage if you wanted to, and then plant a smother crop so that any seed that's there in the seed bank has a chance to come up and get killed off, and then you spray again and then plant. And if you do that, we know that you will have those stands will stay clean. I'm working with somebody there at NC State now. We're working with old stands and going out to understand. And if you have reasonably good management, you can expect it to stay clean in this case, up to 20 years without any reinvasion.
Any other burning question out there? Dr. Poore, one thing you mentioned here at the end, you said if you sow Kentucky 31, maybe 25%. Give us a little idea on your experience of what percentage of the infection there is in the pastures that you deal with.
Okay, so when we go out to farms that have been there for a long time, I mean these old stands in Kentucky, like what I grew up with was planted in the 60s. They are going to be 95% infected. And the reason is that every time we go through a bad drought, the endophyte-free plants, there are some that don't have fungus in them, they die. And then the open ground is either new seeds or the Kentucky 31 that's infected just spreads out. So that's the problem, is we gradually see it getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And so that's why when you plant a new stand, you're going to be in maybe that 25, 30%. You're going to think, oh, this is great, everything's okay. And then it seems like gradually you start to get this problem more and more. And we do have data that shows that over about 15 years, that happens.
Very good explanation. Thank you a lot. Let's give a nice hand to Dr. Poore. Really good presentation.